And welcome back to Taxation is Theft, the show that talks about all the ways the government is ripping you off, broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube from an underground bunker deep within the jungles of Mexico. I'm Dan, Taxation is Theft Berman, former candidate for President of the United States, currently in the race for Governor of Texas. And tonight, I have an awesome guest. Charles Peralo has the opinion that libertarians should stop being so damn radical. We're going to talk about that. He's the founder of Stop Scrolling Media and also the founder of BeingLibertarian.com. He's also been the campaign manager to Governor Lincoln Chafee during part of his presidential campaign in this last election. Of course, before we get started, if you're watching the live streams, make sure to like and share or start a watch party. And don't forget to send in your comments and ask questions. We do watch those while the show's going on. And also head over to taxationistheft.info and support us. Help us to get this information out there. Everything that you do through that site, whether you're buying these really awesome hats or t-shirts or flags, goes to help our efforts to spread counter propaganda to end taxation around the world. There's also, if you head over to our YouTube page, there's plenty of extra content, so make sure you head over there and like and subscribe. And now, on to the show. Charles, welcome. How's it going?
How you doing there, Dan?
Doing pretty good. So, let's, man, I always want to jump right in, but I also have so many other questions.
Give me any question you want. We're here for a while, so I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, so let's start with Lincoln Chafee. What was that like working on his campaign?
Oh man, that's a great question. And honestly, so you know, the way I got involved with that, with working with Governor Chafee, is I was having dinner with my partner John, who's from Chicago and lives in there. So he was in New York, so we don't get to see each other that often. And he, I saw on Andy Craig's Facebook post, if you know Andy, who's been involved in the LP for a while, and I believe he got 5% running for office in Wisconsin as auditor of the state. And, he said, I didn't expect Lincoln Chafee to join the LP, but glad to see it. And, the party, the party's a little weird. And I don't think, always been the most competent thing in the planet. So I was like, a lot of people are going to reach out to Chafee. Let me try to reach out because I don't want to see some people who are going to just try and scam him for money or give him weird advice or whatever. Because I had a feeling he was running for president because my partner, John, who's not a political guy, he was like, well, look, no one joins the LP who's a former governor or senator unless they're running for president. So I shoot him a message. And then, for some reason, I end up a week later, I'm at a party at the Profundo nightclub in Queens, and then at the Playboy Club, and I'm out until 7 in the morning. And I see a message at 7 a.m. where I'm about to go to sleep because I messaged Chafee through Facebook, and I asked him for a phone call, and I just get a message back saying, sure. And it's he gave me his email. It's let's set up a time this week. So I end up doing a phone call with him and a guy who I'll call my work wife, Jacob Linker, even though with my hair, he always says I'm the wife. And, we end up doing a call. I thought it was going to go for 20 minutes and he was going to say, I'm interested. It ended up being nearly 3 hours. And we talked about the idea of him running for president. And it was a really cool thing because, one thing I can say is I've been interested in politics for a long time. I was, I want to say 24 years old at the time. So to be 24 years old and, just talking to a guy who was a former governor and senator, someone who 10 years ago I was researching, that's a really awesome experience to have. And then we asked him to, introduce him to people in the party because he said we were the first phone call. So I put him on a call with Gary Johnson, put him in a phone call with, not Nick Sarwark, but Daniel Fishman and a lot of other people who he otherwise wasn't introduced to. And I also gave him some advice on who I thought he should stay away from, who I thought he shouldn't know. I set up his interview with Larry Sharpe. And ultimately, he set up the campaign where, I think a couple mistakes happened early on with our involvement. And he ended up hiring Christopher Thrasher, who is the campaign manager to Mike Gravel 08 and John McAfee 2016. And Chris, it wasn't my advice to pick him. I think ultimately a lot of people who saw that campaign and saw the first kind of 2 months of it or 3 months of it would know that it wasn't off to a very good start. And I ultimately think Chris was a product of that. I don't think he was the best at working with volunteers. I offered to help out writing content for Facebook and Twitter. And, he kind of just gave a lot of no's. And then, it was not at the best process, and the campaign was losing the nomination. It was horrible. Hell, you were running for the campaign. I think there were a couple of state conventions where you were beating Chafee in the poll. Like, I mean, he was losing every single straw poll. So and like that never happened to Gary Johnson a single time in 2016. So I kind of just reached out to Governor Chafee because I tried reaching through Chris, and he said that Chafee didn't want to talk about COVID, which I was like, this was in the beginning of COVID. I was just scratching my head like, what's going on here? So I decided to email him a long email saying, hey, I could work with Chris, but I want to work with you more directly. I recommended the people I was going to get on, and it was a 2-page email saying, this is how I think we fix the campaign. And I get a phone call back later that day from Governor Chafee, and I was honestly afraid to answer it. I thought he was going to yell at me and say that, like, I'm an asshole for proposing this. First words out of his mouth were, everything you said in that email was absolutely correct. And it was kind of weird to hear a guy who was a U.S. senator tell you that, just call you up out of the blue, and it was pretty cool to hear that. And him and I ended up speaking for an hour. And next day, I bring in Andrew Ekin, Jacob Linker, and myself. Andrew being a student at University of Pennsylvania Law. And Chafee agrees to make us co-campaign managers and share us to the campaign. He introduces us to his friend Caswell Cook, who was a city councilman in Rhode Island and was also a member of the Libertarian Party at the time. And we, just start planning things out. We really scale up the social media, and we did it all for free. My belief in politics is that this is a passion for me versus something that I want to make money on. I'm not like the Ron Nielsen's of the world who, he was Gary's 2016 campaign manager, and there's a bit of stories with that. So we were doing it all for free. We were raising money. We were, doing well on social media, bagging interviews. We had the Washington Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, and Business Insider 4 interviews booked in one day, which was actually more press than I think anyone in the LP primary got for 2020, besides the Jorgensen, who became nominee. And we were doing well, but then he decides to ultimately end the campaign. And I think it was a mix of the following. Number one, a lot of damage done early on in the campaign. Number two, we were kind of struggling on the VP list of coming up with someone the LP would approve, who'd also be able to scale and be able to get us into the debates, help us get there. And the third thing was his mother just passed away the week before, and I think he was a bit down. But I still keep a good relationship with Governor Chafee, and I'd actually be interested in seeing him run in 2024, if not him or Governor Mark Sanford of South Carolina, who I know him fairly well. He, I think, is I would say not a ton of interest yet, but there are people in the LP from different backgrounds who've asked him to run, and I think he actually will consider it in the next year or so, and we could see a campaign from him. But yeah, that's the Lincoln Chafee story.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I got to meet him and talk to him several times at these conventions, and I disagreed with him on a lot of his policy positions, but he's a real nice guy, and it's interesting to see how that works out, because I know we argue over policies and positions and strategies and all this stuff all the time, and I think a lot of people are looking for that fight. They're looking for us to just tear into each other. And before I had met him, that was kind of the plan. Like, oh yeah, like this guy's not a real libertarian. Let me do what I can do. But I meet him, and like I realize he's not like a tyrant like some of these other guys that are sticking with the Democrat and the Republican Party. So I was like, I'm not just gonna destroy the guy. He's a nice guy. So it's really interesting to see how that changes when you kind of see the humanity in these people. When for a lot of people they're just faces, or they're just oh well, he was the governor of a state or a senator, or everyone's kind of got these opinions based on what they see about this, and they kind of miss the humanity. And a lot of that is really I think a lot of people miss out on that, because it's like, we understand, like, people look at, well, he was an employee of the state. It's the same as people who look at police and say all cops are bad. Like, not necessarily, yes, they're working for an organization that does a lot of bad things, but we have to understand a lot of a lot of people who join the military, and this is an easy one for people to understand, are not, they're not criminal in nature. They're being tricked into this system where they're sent off to, kill other people in these wars that really they know nothing about. They're tricked into believing it's for a good cause and all these other things. And, you kind of lose that humanity, I think. And I think that's something that's really important, and especially in this time where everybody likes to rage fight on social media over everything. Like, oh, you said this, you're an idiot, and this is why, this is what we get into. So I think that's always really interesting. So, let's see.
Well, I'd like to comment a little. Well, hold on. I'd like to comment on a little bit about that regarding Governor Chafee, because one thing about him is that, when I first spoke to him, first phone call, one thing I noticed was he was extremely passionate about anti-war policy in this country. He hated the Iraq War. He is proud that he was the only Republican senator to vote against it. I remember mentioning that Gary Johnson, because I said this to him as a joke, but it was true. Donald Rumsfeld actually lives next door to Governor Gary Johnson in New Mexico, and Chafee goes, "Ugh, that man's a war criminal." And I hear that, and I'm like, Governor Chafee, look, there are issues mainly on economics where I'd say I have disagreements with Governor Chafee. I'm like, he's not a big proponent of nuclear power. I am. I'm for school choice. He's more for strengthening the existing school system. So there are differences that I have with him, but I hear that passion about, foreign policy and what we've done overseas. And I thought there was a great fit with him in the Libertarian Party. Very similar to how Tulsi Gabbard is. I'd say that he is Tulsi Gabbard, but much better on budget and the economy versus her, where she definitely is still in kind of the Bernie crew on economics, even though I think she's gotten a little bit better there. But yeah, I thought there was a great synergy. And I actually put Tulsi Gabbard on the VP list. She ended up endorsing Biden. We took her off. But, she was top of the list for a little while.
Yeah, she's pretty interesting too. And she was halfway there for me when she said taxation is theft, but then she followed it up with something like when the government taxes too much or something along those lines, or when you take and you spend it on wasteful programs.
I think it was more about like the wars and her stances there.
Yeah.
She was, when government spends taxes to hurt people, spends tax money to hurt people, it's theft. And I agree with that. I think I don't know anyone who shouldn't agree with that.
Right. No, that's absolutely theft. But of course, my position is that all taxation is theft. So, but yeah, I think, like I said, I think, and especially since she's been in the military for so long, I think she's definitely kind of been brainwashed into that culture. But I think she does have, she's called Edward Snowden a hero. She's asked for him to be pardoned. The same for Julian Assange, I believe. And like these types of things, especially coming from somebody in the military, I think that's, first of all, that's brave if you're in the military. But I think that's something that needs to be acknowledged. And, as long as she's been in there and as long as she's been brainwashed to the socialist economics of the United States, because that's kind of, that's not really, Bernie Sanders is kind of an extreme of that, but really we've been living in that system for 100 years or more. So I think for, it's like, this is the thing. It's normal for people to be socialist. That doesn't mean it's right, but it's normal at this point, and that's something we need to change. And yeah, I suppose that wouldn't be the reason for selecting somebody to be the leader of something, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you want to build a wall between you and them. You want to try to bridge that gap, and if you can, educate them on that thing. There was a girl who posted a video a couple days ago on TikTok, and she was holding up like a $20 bill and a $50 bill, and like apparently this thing went viral, and a lot of people were just talking shit and calling her an idiot because she's like, they're the same piece of plastic. This was like, they look like euros. It's the same piece of plastic, but this one's worth more than the other one because they say so. So she's like, so why don't they just print money and not inflate it? And of course you can't do that, but she didn't understand that, and she was kind of asking that question. And the way she presented the question was it wasn't really as a question, but she did start it out by saying, "Please explain this shit to me." And the internet just went wild insulting her. Like, "Oh, you're such an idiot. You don't understand inflation." And it's like she started out asking for somebody to explain this to her. She understands that fiat is bullshit. Like, it costs the same amount to produce both a 20 and a 50. So that's already a pretty important point that most people, I don't think, understand. She just didn't understand in inflation. So I'm like, so all these people are now building this wall in between them and her, like, "Oh, she's an idiot," when the reality is, no, she's halfway there. Someone teach her the other half, like, and then she could be a great ally to inflation or socialism or whatever whatever the issue exactly is.
So for your point on the divide with Bernie Sanders and the socialist base in this country, I actually think there's a great bridge for people who identify as Bernie supporters or Gabbard supporters to actually come over and support some more free market policy. And I actually think Andrew Yang is a great example of how that bridge exists. So an example of where I'm actually less libertarian, if you want to use that word, than others is I actually do believe in a strong social safety engine in this country. Is it UBI? Not necessarily, because I think there are some budget issues with that. I've proposed, then like I said, when I say propose, there's a lot of math left to be done on this, and I don't want to say this is a definite, but an idea. I would do a program more in the lines of Social Security 360, where it is a combination of trying to actually move towards a more privatized Social Security model with 401k accounts and Roth IRA. But then at the same time, we do have a UBI component of it, and it's based on income. And it's also similar to Milton Friedman's negative income tax model. So I believe the proposal was about $1,000 a month, to just keep it at the Yang proposal. And if you make $30,000 a year, you get $500 a month cash, but then you also get $500 a month put into your 401k account. And the goal is to actually build on interest with that. And the model is, we try to get everyone about 1.3 to 2.5 million dollars in savings by the time they turn 65. And I actually think that we can do that with youth as well. I believe in a model where instead of giving money for free college, I don't support universal college, but I support the idea of, let's give every single child in this country or person under the age of 18, $1,500 to $2,500 a year, put that in a 401k account for them, have it so that they get $75,000 to $120,000 by the time they're 18, and put some rules on that. Say, hey, use it only for education, use it only for housing. And if you don't want to do those two things with it, you can collect half of the interest payment on that. But that is something that I believe would actually end poverty in America. And it's something that wouldn't actually be that expensive. I did some basic math on it, and it would cost only about 1/3 of what universal college would. And I actually think it's something that is much more preferable to lower income Americans. I talked to people. I went to a high school where I want to say 80% of the student body was, using assisted lunch programs. There wasn't a lot of money in Monticello, and college wasn't really an option, even if it was free, because some of these communities and some of these families, they need to work, or some of them, they don't want to go to a 4-year school. They want to go to a trade school. They want to get a job, an apprenticeship, and I think the free college idea is biased against that. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can actually communicate with the hard left and say, hey, we support a model to end poverty, but we have to do it in a way where it's actually pro people and not just anti Jeff Bezos. And that's another thing where I think the left is actually very wrong, and I think libertarians and conservatives are right. Regulation is, just to put it bluntly, bullshit. I think the minimum wage is a failure. I think Davis-Bacon Act is a failure. I think, our rules against nuclear power and our laws against it have prevented us from what could have been the greatest economic miracle in the last 50 years, where we could be paying vastly less for energy right now. And we don't do it because of, just, burdensome regulation, where I think it was big oil that, waged a war on nuclear. So I think there's actually a lot of laws and a lot of regulations that we can cut and get rid of and improve the economy that way. But I also think we can learn a lot from the left as well, in the fact that people are struggling, and we can reform our social safety net and our spending to actually produce a better model. And that's what I'm about, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely interesting that you bring that out, and something I do compliment the left on all the time is their accuracy of pointing out part of the problem which is that, life is not supposed to be easy, right? I mean, we still live in the world. The world is rough. Life is not perfect, but it shouldn't be as hard as it is. And the reason that we have that is we're forced into a system where we're forced to work 40 hours a week, maybe 60 hours a week, for until we're 60 or 70, and then we're supposed to retire, and then we're too sick to enjoy our lives. And I think they're absolutely right to point out things like there is no living wage. So many people are working so hard and they can barely pay their rent. They have to spend their entire income only to end up in debt and all these other problems. And yes, there are some government programs out there that are supposed to save us from this, but ultimately, these are just the problems. The solutions that they have, like the UBIs and the safety nets and all these other things, I think are inherently flawed because they don't actually fix the problem. It's kind of like this: if you have let's say you cut your hand, right, and you're bleeding and you're getting blood all over the floor. Well, yeah, there's a problem that there's blood all over the floor. So is the solution to put down a bucket so there's no blood on the floor, or do you take care of the wound on your hands so you can stop bleeding? And I think that's where the critical difference is in between the Bernie Sanders ideologies or the Andrew Yang's ideologies and some of the things that I've been proposing, which are more about putting people on a solid foundation where they're not being taxed. So, for example, a lot of people believe that home ownership in the United States is the highest it's ever been. I think it's like 60-something% right now. And that's because of the FHA and all these other things. The reality is nobody owns their property because even after you've paid it off, you're still paying property tax. And a lot of people go into retirement with their Social Security only being able to pay their property tax. Some people aren't able to buy a home by the time they retire, and so they're stuck paying rent. And when they get their Social Security check, most of that goes to rent. But even so, you have most people buy their first home when they're about 33 years old with a 30-year loan. So that house isn't even paid off until you're getting ready to retire. And when you compare this to the system that Mexico has, and Mexico's far from perfect, I realize that, but spending a lot of time down here, I see a lot of the way things work down here. They have 80% home ownership, and of those 80% of the entire population, none of those people are in debt on their homes. It's not, people buy their homes cash here. Because of that, the prices are much lower. There's no inheritance tax, so if you die, you give your house to your heirs. The property tax is fractional. It's very, very, very small compared to what the United States is. A lot of people, there's a lot of land where people can just go squat and start building their homes, which is pretty much outlawed in the United States. And we're talking about entire communities where, there are roads, granted they're dirt roads, but of course, this is just what I've seen in the area that I'm in. Dirt roads in the jungle where people can go and squat and, take off like a 20 by 20 meter area, which is a pretty good size area for a nice size house and a nice yard. And they can just start building, and they don't have to worry about rent or property tax or any of this other stuff. And because of all of this stuff, I mean, think about how much money we waste. America's biggest expense is their rent. So you're working a job, and all of your money's going towards rent. And then we have this concept. Well, okay, we're gonna tax the rich so that we can subsidize because they're already living so well. But what you're doing then is you're forcing these people who are close to retirement. You're forcing them to work harder to save up some money so they can retire, because they want to retire well, which means you're forcing them to stay in the employment pool for longer, which means they're competing with everybody else for jobs. Imagine this. Imagine, especially as jobs are being replaced by automation, imagine everybody says, well, hey, I've saved up everything. I own my house. I've got a little piece of land. If shit hits the fan, I've got enough land to grow food on. Everything's taken care of. I've got savings. I'm good. I'm going to retire, and I'm only 40. And now my job opens up for somebody else. So somebody else who might be 25 or 30 gets to move up to a higher position, and the entry-level people are able to get paid more for their jobs because there's fewer people competing. So many of these things could be fixed simply by counterintuitively removing some of these safety net programs that are actually doing more harm than good.
So a few things I want to comment on that. So first off, I actually do agree with you for the most part on property taxes. I'm for the income tax existing. I'm for a flattened down income tax, very few deductions if any. And I don't want to say necessarily flat tax. I'm okay with some people paying higher rates, but I don't think property taxes necessarily work that well. I don't think corporate taxes work either, and I think corporate taxes make up about 8% of America's tax revenue every year. I think we should work on a model to phase that out during the next decade. And if we did that, there would be an economic boom from it. I think payroll taxes, corporate taxes, let's, scale down spending growth, and let's also maybe increase income taxes and move into that model where we're going to have more. Regarding the concept of wealth building, though, that's definitely something I'm talking about with the idea of trying to move to a model like Social Security 360, where we do the UBI plan, we do, some replacements to our current social safety net, but we have an emphasis on savings and, owning part of the economy with it, because there are people out there where, they're lower income and they're not saving a dime. And if they were
Right.
just to save, $100 a month, $200 a month over the course of 10, 20 years, they could be living vastly better than what they're currently living in. So my model is, I think that we actually can do generational wealth building through Social Security through 360, and we could get it so families do have, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in 401k accounts that are locked in for them, and they could be, off of, dividends, off of returns, living well through that, and that could be a strong economy. Regarding property taxes, though, I've done a little bit of research on this. Um, I haven't looked at Mexico's housing, so I'm going to just say that very clearly. But housing in America, so price per square foot compared to 1970, the price per square foot has actually dropped a little bit because houses are actually larger now. I believe it was 2,000 square feet versus 1,400 in 1970. And then if we were to adjust interest rates because interest rates were about, I want to say 120, 150% higher in 1970 versus now. So if you were to actually pay a house down, 10, 20% when you buy and have to pay the remaining 80 to 90% over the course of 20 years, you'd actually be paying about, maybe 10 to 30% more. I'd have to look back at my notes, but you'd be paying more money actually per square foot versus now. So I actually do think the economy has improved for a lot of people. I mean, I did the same thing with cars. If you look at auto loans, interest rates on those, and then how long cars last, and also mileage on cars are actually much cheaper now versus 50 years ago. But the thing is, we have an economy that works very well with technology. We don't have an economy that's working very well with other things, land being one of them. I think zoning laws is responsible. Look at Houston,
Mm-hmm.
Texas versus New York City. New York City has the ability to make rent cheap. There's Staten Island, there's Queens, there's Brooklyn, there's downtown Manhattan. They don't get built up that easily, and because of that, it is hurting our economy. I also do think you make a great point about how these programs that are designed to help actually end up hurting. And one thing I've been a proponent of in New York City is the idea that people who live in public housing, why are we just taking money from them and they're just basically being tenants to us? Why don't we start making them owners where the money that they're paying is going to give them
Right.
equity in the homes? If we were to have done that with the Bronx and done it with Harlem and done it with Queens years ago, we would have made these people owners in those properties and they would be millionaires right now. And there would have been some government subsidy to it, but we would have had no gentrification problem in New York City. These people would have walked off millionaires, and it's an amazing thing that could have happened, and we missed the opportunity on it. And I also do think with the welfare state at hand, when it comes to welfare in this country, Whoopi Goldberg actually said it best because she said, I was a single mother, I used public assistance, and why is it that when I was trying to save money and also work a job, they were penalizing me in the welfare system. So we need a social safety engine, not a social safety net, because the net is trapping in millions of people, and they're staying there longer than they have to, and they're not getting out of poverty. We need to actually really reform that system. And I don't think Andrew Yang's 100% right on UBI. I think he's oversimplified things. And also, by the way, you brought up cutting your hand and bleeding versus the bucket. I actually think deregulation is our bandage. I think that we could have nuclear power. We could have better immigration models. I also think we need better schools. I think the biggest problem in our economy right now is we have an education system where we subsidize degrees that weren't very good to get a job. We made it too easy to get, this, college degree that doesn't have a tremendous market value, and now you have to pay $100,000 for it. And then at the same time, we also had a model where our high schools, our high schools are, government. They're one size does not fit all on education. We should be having school choice, so high schools can tell parents, hey, we teach coding here. Hey, we teach, engineering here. Hey, we teach finance here, and create a better product for our kids. Because, I went to high school and I didn't think it was the best product. I was like, I learned more on my own from watching YouTube videos than I did about, things. And I don't want to, the teachers were great, the students were great, the faculty was great, but they don't have to compete. They're not given the best model. So we need a lot of reforms in this country to help poverty.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to point out too, and I don't know the details about this system entirely, but instead of a social security program down here in Mexico, they do have something where so instead of setting up a retirement fund for you, the government actually helps you purchase a home where if you have a certain low income, they'll buy the house for you. You make payments to them, and it's some kind of program like that. So what's interesting about that is, yeah, so yeah, because they're helping you to actually build wealth instead of helping you to pad their bankrupt Social Security program.
Well, yeah, no, government, here's the thing. This is something where I think, this is one of those things where, to get into the topic of, do libertarians go radical? I think the Libertarian Party, they've had a lot of wins. They've had a lot of things they're right on. Gay marriage, they were right on. Marijuana, they're right on. Social Security, the budget deficit. There's 50 years of being right. But the problem, you mentioned early on with, Bernie Sanders people, they're half right on stating the problem, but then they get the solution wrong. I think libertarians are very simple, where they get the problem correct, they get the solution half right, but then the issue is they go to an extreme. I'm not for eliminating Social Security, but yeah, it's bankrupt. It's not going to work. And if you were to factor in how much money people put into Social Security versus what a 401k account could be, it's not comparable. We could have a generation right now where everybody has over $750,000 to $1 million in savings that they could pass on to their kids, and we're not doing it because we've run a Social Security program that I don't think was ever designed to work like this. And it's amazing that I think Mexico and Chile might actually have the U.S. beat in how to model it.
Right. Yeah, and I criticize the libertarians all the time, especially on that. And so here's my thing. I think I'm pretty radical myself, and of course I think I'm right. But I do realize
I'm not radical, and I also think I'm right too. So here we go.
So, but I do realize a lot of people want to just pull the plug, and I understand that's the completely wrong answer for two reasons. One, nobody's ever going to support that. The people who depend on that system are never going to support that. They're never going to let you anywhere near that system to pull the plug. And so that's, one, it's the wrong message. Two, it's the wrong plan. I guess that's why it's the wrong message. And it's the wrong plan, because if you ever do get into that position and you pull the plug, there are so many people, let's say Social Security, for example. If you were to pull the plug on that overnight, what's going to happen is there are a lot of people who are completely unprepared. You're going to have seniors who now have no income. They're not able to go back to work. You're going to create a lot of problems for a lot of people. Now, yes, I will say this system never should have been created in the first place, because it's literally stealing. It's a Ponzi scam. It's a Ponzi scheme. But if you were to pull the rug out from under people, there are gonna be a lot of people who are upset. There are gonna be a lot of people who, we've seen what can happen this year with people getting out and protesting and rioting. That's gonna happen as well if you just eliminate programs like this overnight. You're gonna have people who don't have jobs, who don't have money, who don't have food. They have nothing to lose, and they're gonna get out and they're gonna fight like this. And then everyone's gonna just come along and say, well, we tried the libertarian way. We tried getting rid of all these programs, and look what happened. And so I think, so for that reason, it's the wrong message and it's the wrong plan. We need to have, I would say, I know we disagree on this, I would say get rid of the program completely, but at the same time, I would say we need to transition people into another program. And the program you mentioned, like, for example, I have nothing wrong with 401ks. If we got people to invest in 401ks, which I would say don't need to be 401ks, because the purpose of a 401k is that you don't have to pay income tax on it. So if you don't have income tax, then you don't need a 401k. But to get people to invest into some sort of savings and retirement, to get people to invest and build their own wealth, to own their own home and own their own property, that's the type of thing that I could see. And, to the point of the 401ks being better than Social Security, I think that's got a lot to do with government is in control of Social Security is an investment system, right? Like you've got your 401k and you've got Social Security. They're the same thing. You put money in it, it's supposed to grow, and then when you retire, you take money out. The difference is one is managed by the private sector and one is managed by the government. The private sector is investing in whatever they can to earn you bigger returns. The public sector, the Social Security, is investing in one thing and one thing only, treasury bonds, and basically giving the money to the government so the government can spend it with the promise of taxing it from somebody else later. So with that in mind, I think there's.
And by the way, they're not even doing the bonds anymore. They're just giving people, what's left over and putting that as the funds. It's a disaster, and it's never going to work out. And so, here's the thing. There was once a video I saw on YouTube about 10 years ago where they they showed a dartboard, and they were asking people to put randomly on the dartboard and say, and they found that for Social Security, pretty much every form of investment you could imagine outperformed Social Security where there was the money involved. And it's something that's, I think there are ways, I think there are the ideas of having very conservative investments, and that's also why I went to the model of saying, hey, I think there's a UBI component to this in case there ever was a very bad year for the market. But now regarding what you're saying about, programs, so I actually 100% agree with you on, the idea we need to cut spending or, need to reform these programs and, replace them with new things, because there is the phase out model. And just one example, I think the spending is absolutely horrible with our government. I think there's a lot of paper pushers out there. I think there's a lot of, soldiers who don't need to be soldiers anymore. And one thing I think we should do is, because if we were to fire them, we'd fire millions of people. We'd lay off millions of people. We can't do that. But I think we should just, go to, the federal workforce and say, hey, we're going to offer the best severance package ever. We're going to offer something like 3 to 5 years salary up front. Here you go. And you just, no longer are working. Go do something else with your life. Go get retrained. Go find a new job. Go enjoy yourself. And you're out. And I guarantee you, we would not even have to have any involuntary layoffs, because I think the people who would, I think a lot of people would just take that deal and leave right away. In fact, I believe 30% of the federal workforce is over the age of 55. So we're already in a position where, 1 in 3 people who are working for the government on the federal level, they are, already there at a point they could retire. So, we could early retire these people. And, we could actually walk off in a situation where government spending on an employee front, that can go down 10, 20% overnight. And it wouldn't actually take, anyone to complain. And, I think there are actually reforms for how we could look at, Medicare, for example, or Social Security, do programs like this and actually, get things to work better. And the big point of what I say for government is I'm not for no government. I'm not for no taxes. But I'm for the idea of, why aren't we focused on trying to build a government that does very few things very well versus a government that does everything very poorly? Look at Colorado, for example. I was there not that long ago, and, Reason Magazine covered this, and I saw wild horses running through the state of Colorado. I'm from New York. We don't have wild horses here. And I was looking, and I'm like, that's beautiful to see. And I found out all the ranchers actually hated the horse situation, because it only takes the horse population about 4 years for it to double. And horses are going into ranches, and they're disturbing things. And the federal government had, a code. 24,000 wild horses are supposed to be in Colorado on that land, and they have 56,000 horses now. And I'm just sitting there like, why is the federal government involved with how many horses should be in Colorado?
Right.
That's Colorado. Like, let them do that. And I'm just sitting there like, and by the way, one of the biggest things I think, libertarians are right on, they've been right on for years, and I think they could win if they went, to these states and addressed it. I believe 70% of the state of Nevada is owned by the federal government.
Yep.
70% of Idaho is owned by the federal government. The West is owned by the federal government, and it shouldn't be. It should be owned by Nevada. It should be owned by the people. There should be a plan to go to Idaho, which is a state that has been financially struggling for years, and say, hey, this is your land. We're going to get rid of the federal government's land in Idaho, and we're going to give it to every single citizen. And I also think it should be given to the citizens. I think it should be given to some Native Americans who, they need, like, I think, a reparation. And I also do think it should be given to the Black community as a reparation for slavery as well. I think we should cut up this land, give these, like, deeds of ownership to people, and have them figure out better uses for it. And maybe, let's set up some conservation rules to make sure, the first thing they do is not chop down trees and, destroy the land. But let's have a real plan like that, because the idea that, there's 60,000 wild horses in Colorado that are actually disturbing the environment, and our government has no idea what to do with it, and they actually make it illegal to go out and try to do something. It's insane.
Right. Well, I would say this. I mean, you make the point that, the government is too big. It's spending all this money on things it shouldn't. And why don't we focus on building a government that works for the people? And I think this fundamentally comes down to the issue that taxation is theft. Because why does the government have the capacity to do all of this? Why does the government have so many employees? Why does the government have so much land? And, as they say, nothing is yours if you can't defend it. Why does the federal government have so many people to be able to defend these millions of acres and claim that they're theirs? Whatever gave them the right to claim this land as theirs? Why does the government have all of these resources to do all these things, to create all these bad programs that are destroying lives, that are forcing people into poverty and hunger, that are forcing people from not just going to this land and taking it and homesteading it? Why does the government have that much power? And the answer is taxes. They don't have, you look at Elon Musk. Is he doing anything really evil with all the billions of dollars that he has? What about Jeff Bezos? Is he really doing anything incredibly evil with that? Is he hiring armies to go around and steal from people? Is he creating regulations that are telling people they can't go homestead on this land over here, on these millions of unoccupied acres? No, it's the government that does that. Because why? Jeff Bezos, he has billions of dollars, but why would he invest in something like that? That doesn't make any sense. But here you have government. You have these crony, corrupt politicians with an unlimited budget, trillions of dollars. And who's giving them that money? Well, you and I are. Well, we don't like what they're doing with it. Why don't we stop giving it to them? Why don't we give them less? We're not even allowed to give them less. If we give them less, we're in trouble. Why? Because that's the entire system. The entire system is based on theft. And if you don't stop theft, if you don't make every contribution that goes to, whether it's the state or federal government or local government, if you don't make every single contribution to that system completely voluntary, then you lose. Because think about it. If Jeff Bezos declared war against Israel, he's got enough money. He could hire an army and he could declare war against Israel. What's going to happen? People are going to boycott Amazon. They're going to cut off his funds, and he's not going to have any money to go to war with anybody. What happens when the United States wants to go to war with a family in Waco, Texas, or against an entire country in the Middle East? Nothing. Nobody can stop them, because at the end of the day, we're still giving them money. We have to. Not only are they doing something that we morally oppose, we're being forced to pay for it. And so that is the main reason that we can't just say we have to cut it back. We have to stop the theft. We have to be able to put the power back in our hands to say, we don't like that program, we're not going to pay for it.
So I'm not for eliminating taxation, but I do think we need to have better rules in place on, fact checking our government. I actually believe we need to have strict rules for how much our government spends to GDP, and I think we need a constitutional amendment capping GDP to
But who's going to make those rules?
spending to GDP. I think that we need to have strict rules on how much spending growth can happen unless there is a war or some sort of
But
emergency
who's going to
like
make
COVID.
those rules?
Oh, what?
But who's going to make those rules?
The government would have to, and we have. Well, here's the
The
thing.
same
If we
people
can
who
actually
spend
get,
it. This,
yeah,
this is
but well,
this
here's
is
the
the
thing. If we can
exact same
get,
problem we have with the debt ceiling, where there's a debt ceiling that says you can never run the debt higher than this amount, and whenever they want to borrow, and whenever they want to exceed that amount, they just vote to raise the debt, and now they can borrow more money and spend more.
oh, they don't follow the rules well at all, and that's the point. We need to actually have good management of government. But there is the point of saying, I could ask the question of who's going to eliminate all taxes because, eventually it gets to the point where we have to have a government reform no matter what. It just, what are we trying to reform or fix there? So regarding the idea of, balanced budget amendment, GDP caps, I'm for all of those, and I think that, that's the measures we have to take to actually make government work better. Regarding the whole thing about, just, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, yeah, I'd rather have them have, taxpayer money than, the current government. And that's actually the biggest problem with the Bernie left. They run around and say that, Jeff Bezos is the enemy. Jeff Bezos isn't the enemy. Jeff Bezos is the child of a single mom who went to, form a company that's made things vastly cheaper that saves the American people 50 to $100 billion a year. And it's also been environmentally friendly of a company because they've actually worked to reduce, the carbon pollutions from shipping because they ship things better. So Amazon's an amazing company, and these companies are awesome. So this war against capitalism, and that's actually the big problem with the left, by the way. The left has this issue where I think they care more about the idea that people are wealthier than they are versus actually helping people in poverty.
Right.
And it's a huge problem that they have because I hear all these people who are, like, Bernie supporters or Warren supporters, they run around and say, well, Zuckerberg has too much money, Warren Buffett has too much money. And I could care less how much money they have because, at the end of the day, it's not cash on hand. Jeff Bezos has $180 billion.
Right.
That's Amazon stock. If he ever tried to sell it, he wouldn't even get a third of that much money, which would still be a lot, but not as much as people think. Um, and if there ever was this thing where billionaires couldn't exist, they would not get 10% on the dollar. Like if there was a law, billionaires can't exist. They all have to sell their stock or whatever. They would not get 10 cents on the dollar for what
Right.
they're valued at right now. That's just a fact. So what happens there is we have these people try to demonize like they're demonizing business, they're demonizing these people who've created these great things for the economy. I mean, Eric Wan, who is the founder of Zoom, who I don't know him extremely well. He occasionally likes my Facebook post. I call him a good acquaintance. He created a great company and an example of what happens when you leave an oppressive state like China to come to a less oppressive state like America, and you build a company that changes the world and lets us have conversations like this. But then I just look at the left, and there's so many things they should be opposed to the government because guess what? The government is the one that runs the police system that has the war on drugs. The government is the one that makes this public school system not work, and they're denying choice to their people. And by the way, the public school system is a civil rights issue because I got to go to private school for 10 years of my life, and because my father was a doctor, my parents had cash. But all these people, most people, their education is decided by their zip code, and they also have the government. There's a lot of people on the left who they intentionally go out of their way to say, oh yeah, no, we want better schools for lower income kids. But then the moment they get into those votes on the local level, they're the ones that say, well, we don't want this neighborhood in our school. We want it in that school because that's the worst school. We don't want those kids in our school. So there's so much hypocrisy in the left when it comes to that, and we need to reform that. And the idea of like, can we fix the government? I think that's ultimately the big question that the Libertarian Party's had for years, and it's been a big question in the Liberty movement. Hell, I think we're kind of skirting around to it. So, is there an idea that the government could actually fix things, and governmental actions are the best way to do it? I believe that there's no other way that we can make that fix. I think that we've talked about options such as Bitcoin or seasteading or these other things as a hope that they could fix it. I don't think they'd really work. honestly, I think the best company that actually helped fix the government a little bit, or at least, go against the government was actually Uber, because, for decades, there were the medallion monopolies in every city. They said, hey, this
Right.
is how many cabs can exist. This is who has the medallions. If you want to own your own cab, it's going to cost $1 million. And the first time I ever got exposed to that idea was watching a documentary by Walter Williams, rest in peace, great economist. Um, and Dr. Williams in the 70s, he pointed out the difference between the Washington, D.C. cab industry versus the Philadelphia cab industry. And, he said Washington, D.C. is very cheap to get a medallion to own your own cab. And that's why 80% of people in Washington, D.C. own cabs. And he also pointed out in Washington, D.C., you can actually, be parked. You can hold up, a sign saying, like cabs or whatever here, and people can come to you versus Philadelphia and New York City, where it's extremely expensive to get a medallion. And then at the same time, they could only drive around and people would have to call out and they could stop for them. So that's insane. The idea we had that much regulation and it was hurting, people in poverty. And I had some issues with Walter Williams, especially in the last decade, where I think he kind of sided a little bit too much with some craziness. But that was a great documentary, and I'd recommend for anyone listening to watch it. It was called "State Against Blacks," and I believe it's on YouTube. It's 6 parts. Give it a watch.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I think this is, you mentioned about the left that a lot of these guys have these really great talking points and then they get elected and then they don't deliver on those. And I think a lot of that, I mean, we see that with the police. Like the Democrats are usually the people who side with minorities and lower income families, but the police generally, with the war on drugs and everything else, they generally patrol neighborhoods with lower income more. That's generally where they even though people with higher income use drugs at the same rate, the people with lower income are the ones who are profiled, arrested, harassed, and all this other stuff. And the Democrats are, the people who are for the minorities and they're for, the little guy and they're for injustice, protecting people from injustice and all this other stuff. But ultimately, it's the Democrats who are funneling more money into the police unions than anybody else. And so, we see the same thing with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden coming out and saying like, oh yeah, we're gonna protect people from this police misconduct, and we're gonna do all these reforms, and we're gonna end the drug war and all this other stuff. When they created Biden created
Donald Trump was better for criminal justice than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were. And Donald
exactly.
Trump wasn't even that great. I mean,
And it's
and
like
look, Donald, please
it's
continue.
almost like the Democrats are like they're creating these plans and selling them so they can create more problems so they can sell the solution, which is just like, that's like the mechanic that you take your car to and like, yeah, he changes your oil, but then he pulls one of your spark plug cables out so that you have to bring it back and say, oh, something else isn't working now, and they got to fix something else.
Well, for criminal justice reform, I'm also just going to say it. Like, like, okay, I believe in the slogan, Black Lives Matter. Black lives do matter. And, 100% happy to, help them with reforms in education, economics, and, criminal justice. I don't necessarily agree with, all the reforms they proposed and have my own, but that's a different discussion. But I think the big slogan should be, poor lives matter, because, like we always discuss these problems, like, is this a black problem or is this an everyone problem? I actually think it's a problem for people in poverty, because if you're a wealthy person in this country, if you make over 50,000 a year or 100,000 a year and you get busted for cocaine or marijuana, you're not getting in trouble. Your parents will
Right.
get you the right lawyer and you get community service. If you're making under 25 grand a year, you get busted for that, you're going to jail for 3 years. And that's what the big thing is. I mean, because I remember looking at this, the African American community gets sentenced to 23% longer for the same crimes as white people. But then if we factor in the community of people who make under 50 to 75,000 a year, they get sentenced. I believe it was something in the realm of 300% more time. Like their sentences are 300% longer, and also their rate of innocence versus conviction is not even comparable. So those things, that's where we need to also reform the criminal justice system. And I actually believe one great reform we should make on our legal system is actually creating a curve policy when it comes to sentencing for minorities and then also for lower income people, where we begin to actually look and say, hey, why were white people sentenced 25% less than black people? And we're going to start lowering the sentences of black people for the crimes on that front. So there's so much going wrong with criminal justice, and I also think Kamala Harris is actually, like I supported Biden over Trump, but Kamala Harris, it was a disaster. If he picked any other VP, I think he would have actually had a decisive victory over Trump. And she is something where she is, we talk about this idea of like, what is wrong with Washington? And I don't think it's Joe Biden. I don't necessarily think it's Donald Trump. It's Kamala Harris. It's the people who will say anything to get elected, and they show no principle at all. Kamala Harris was one of the worst prosecutors and worst attorney general in America during the 2010s. She sent people to jail. She was going to let a man die, and the Supreme Court had to intervene against him, and thankfully they kicked her ass on it. And then what happened was the moment she becomes a senator and she sees the win, she's like, oh, I could run in 2020. And oh, criminal justice reform is popular now. She no longer is the tough prosecutor. She's for everybody. And the moment that Kamala Harris sees it, Kamala Harris was a moderate. And she's like, oh, well, Bernie's popular, so I'm going to become a bigger socialist than he is. And she actually proposed more spending than Bernie Sanders did, if that's even possible. And then the moment that, that's no longer a thing, she's like, oh, I like Joe Biden. I entertained the idea he could have been a rapist and a racist a year ago, but now I like him. And she becomes vice president of the United States. And that's something we're going to have to fight to keep people like her out. Donald Trump said, drain the swamp. I don't think Joe Biden's the swamp. I think Joe Biden is a guy who's a decent person that's confused on issues. I think Kamala Harris is the actual swamp and the epitome of what's wrong with Washington.
Right. So, man, with that, we're getting towards the end of the show, and I mean, we could keep talking about this for hours. This is actually,
I could bash Kamala Harris for 10 hours straight.
Yeah, on that issue alone. Yeah, I want to give you an opportunity. Just if there's anything, if anyone's interested in you, they want to find out more about you or what you're working on, or if there's anything that you want to plug. I just want to give you a few minutes to go ahead and.
Sure. Oh, we're cutting out?
Oh, no.
Oh, we cut out there. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, happy to do some plugs. So on TikTok, it's Charles Peralo, Peralo. Also Facebook right now. I'm setting up a website and a newsletter. Don't have it up just yet. But Facebook, if anyone wants to just follow me there, I write posts on business every day. I don't do as much political posts, even though tomorrow I am writing about Biden's Health and Human Services Secretary pick. Going to give a solid meh on that guy. Nothing good, nothing bad. The final thing I'd just like to say is that, first off, Dan, thanks for having me. I know we disagree on some stuff in the Liberty universe, but it is always nice to have these conversations and see how, in the grand scheme of things, I think we agree more than we disagree. But the final thing I'd like to say is, just kind of a message for kind of the Liberty movement, which is, I think that from talking to a lot of people and from being able to, I think, get more synergy and more agreements with conservatives and liberals versus, some people in the LP, I think that there is, a lot of work and a lot of success the Libertarian Party and the Liberty movement can have. But, right now, I think they're looking for hundreds in terms of what they want to agree with them. I think if they go for an 80, they are going to have a lot of success. It's one of those things where, like they were right on the Libertarian Party was right on gay marriage, right on marijuana, right on the budget issues, right on Social Security. But I think they took things a little too far on all those issues, and they don't necessarily get the credit that I feel they deserve. And I think just coming down a little bit and just being willing to work with people a little more, there's going to be some great things to happen there. And I guess the final thing is, final thing I'll say before I leave, I don't think taxation is theft, but taxation, when it goes to a lot of things it goes to, is definitely unnecessary and it is wrong of what's happening.
So let me ask you this question.
All right.
If
final one.
let's say, okay, just real quick, give me one thing that you think a tax, if a tax paid for it, it would not be theft.
NASA. I think that the idea that we have, I think the idea of investing in science is a great thing, and I think that we should actually work to take our military and convert the money there to curing diabetes, cancer, HIV. I think the Human Genome Project and NASA are proof that we can do that within the next decade, and it would massively help our economy. Like curing Alzheimer's should be our moon mission this decade.
Okay, so real quick, if a tax for NASA is not theft, but if you get sick and you have a medical bill, or you lose your job and you need to buy food, and the government is telling you that you need to pay a tax, and you have to decide between paying that tax or buying your food or paying for your medicine. And if you pay for your medicine or food instead of paying the tax, you go to jail. Is that theft?
If the government is taxing people 1 penny who are making under $50,000 a year, I think that's wrong. I think government, look, I'm not for someone who wants to penalize wealthy people. It's not my thing. But I don't believe that people who are lower income and struggling should be paying, taxes. And I also do not believe that, look, it's one of those things where I believe we should help the poor and we should help lower income people. If someone's making $1 million a year, they benefited from some government roads. They benefited from workers who are publicly educated. They benefit from a safe country that's through our military and not oppressed by China or Russia. I believe there is some taxes to be paid. Not a lot of taxes, but some. And I don't think the taxation. But for someone who has a medical bill, if someone is struggling with cancer and their government is trying to charge them taxes, and that's the situation, that is completely wrong, and I do not support that.
Awesome. Well, and I like what you just said too. Anybody making under $50,000 should not pay a penny in tax, and I think we can definitely agree on that as a starting point. I think also that's a really good point that you said too. If you're it shouldn't matter how much you made. If you have a life or death emergency or anything, and you have to pay that instead of your taxes, and the government's going to harass you for it, then let's make an exemption for that too. So I think those are both great starting points.
Here's the thing. The whole point of conversations that I like about this is that, look, I'm not the kind of guy to go out and say taxation is theft. I'm not the type of guy to go out and say let's get rid of the government. But I think there's a proper medium between viewpoints like yours and viewpoints like what exists in Washington, where I think you make a lot of correct points, and I think they actually make something as well. So I like to kind of be the referee in between it and get a system that I think we can all be comfortable with, at least for a while. We might want to change some things down the road, or they might want to, but I think if we can get to a point where everybody says, hey, this isn't what I wanted, but I like this better than what I had before, I think that's a great achievement to have.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Charles, it's been great having you on. Definitely like to have you back sometime and talk some more about this. And of course, everybody listening, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you heard, even if you didn't, click like and share and subscribe and follow and do all that great stuff. Check out the next episodes that are coming up. And don't forget to help us out by heading over to taxationistheft.info. We're actually giving away something. It looks kind of like an AR-15, but it's not. But if you want to sign up, we're giving it away for free. Just go to taxationistheft.info and look for the free giveaway there. And of course, anything you do to support us on that page, whether you're buying a hat or a t-shirt, it all goes to help our counter propaganda campaign that is working to end taxation around the world. And of course, as we had Charles on the show today, and he does not believe that all taxation is theft, this is a living example, this conversation that we had right here, of how you can actually have an adult conversation with somebody who you don't agree with. You can learn something from them. You can come to some middle ground agreement of a stepping stone to head in the direction of what you believe is the right societal change that we need to go to. And this is all important and necessary if we're ever going to get anywhere. If we ever want to see any real progress towards a better life for this country or for this world, this is the direction we have to go. Because if we're just throwing insults at each other, we're not listening, and we're just fighting, we're never going to get anywhere. We're just going to continue to divide ourselves. And that's what we got with this last election, and this is why this country is so divided right now. So if we need to fight against anything, we need to fight against that. We need to come together, and we need to have these kinds of discussions. So again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Taxation is Theft.